Okay, I think we'll start. Hi, everybody. My name's Marty Hurst, and welcome to Big Data Analytics with Twitter. I have this silly thing on because we're recording the lecture so that we can put it online. So I guess it'll be pretty unlikely that anything you say will be picked up by the mic. So if there are questions, I'm going to try to remember to repeat them so that it is recorded. Am I making that clicking sound? I don't think. Does anyone know where the clicking sound's coming from? I hope it's not me. Okay, great. So there's a lot of people in the room, and we'll talk about that fact a little bit later, but I just wanted to plunge into the interesting topic before we go. But before I start, I want to introduce Gilad Mishneh, who is my partner in crime here. He is the person from Twitter that said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had a class about Twitter with UC Berkeley? So let's thank Gilad before we start. He and I are going to be giving this lecture together today. We're going to intersperse it. So I'm going to go for about 15 minutes, then he'll talk for about 20, and then I will continue the lecture. So let's talk about it. So first of all, what is Twitter? What's Twitter?
It's a microblogging site where you can just update your status in under 140 characters.
So it's a microblogging site where you can update your status. What was the last part you said?
In under 140 characters.
In 140 characters or fewer.
Apps that have been developed
And there's apps developed to make it longer. And I'm repeating you for the audience outside. Okay, I think that's an excellent summary. And why don't I illustrate that? So here I have the output of somebody actually making a message, posting a message, otherwise known as a tweet. This is somebody named Sarah Silverman. Anyone heard of her? She's a famous comedian. I guess this is a pretty famous tweet where she typed, "When your relatives drive you crazy, just close your eyes and pretend it's dialogue in a Woody Allen movie." Okay, has anyone seen this tweet? And has anyone seen the response to this tweet? It's sort of a famous response that was made to this tweet. Has anyone heard of Woody Allen? Yeah, okay. Sometimes I find when I make cultural references, the students are too young to have heard of them. So that actually happens embarrassingly often. So some things about this is you mentioned status. So that was one of the original ideas behind Twitter, was to have an ubiquitous constant status update of what am I doing or what am I thinking. So here, Sarah Silverman is not kind of your everyday person. She's a comedian, but she's sort of sharing a thought that she happens to be having at that time, although it's probably a little bit of a performance as well. But this, what happened after she tweeted this, and a tweet is just the name that came along for when someone makes a status update on Twitter, is that somebody else saw this tweet, and an important thing about Twitter is that the messages or the tweets are public and are able to be seen by anyone around the world, which is, still, when you think about it, still kind of amazing. So anyone else can see them and can also post a message in response. And so somebody did, namely Mia Farrow, who is also a celebrity, and she wrote, "Tried that, didn't work," in response. And if you know who Mia Farrow is, she's somebody who is kind of related in some ways to Woody Allen. And so I find this to be a really fascinating thing, is that basically celebrities who don't know each other can have conversations in public on this using this mechanism. And so it's one of the reasons why Twitter and a microblogging site is, I think, a new form of communication that we never saw before, that didn't exist before, where people who don't know each other but that are perhaps known to the world can end up having a conversation with each other across space and time without having to have been introduced. And so it's a conversation tool as well. And I think that's one thing you didn't mention, and that was not actually necessarily foreseen by the founders of Twitter when it first started, that it would become a conversational tool either. So any other thoughts on what is Twitter? Yes?
I think Twitter leads to a lot of open communication. Like you mentioned that there are a lot of times when we would like to share ideas, and it's the quickest way to exchange ideas through the use of technology. And if you are interested in following a certain group of people or following someone having certain ideas, you could use features like follow, etc., and then be a part of that
So a way to share ideas, and you also mentioned following. So it's a way to form a community by people connecting with other people. So again, that's another big part of it, making connections between people and building communities. So it's a method for building relationships among and between people. Okay, any other thoughts? Contributions? Yes. News being generated. Well, funny you should say that. Actually, my very next slide is I made this slide yesterday, not today, but it's today's paper. It was Wednesday's New York Times. I'm prehistoric, so I actually read it on paper in the morning. So I had to go online to, this was the version I saw, the little thumbnail on the side. But if you look at the very bottom, on the front page of the New York Times was a story called "The New Rise of a Summer Hit, Tweet It Maybe." So it was tweeting was on the front page of yesterday's paper. That's how ubiquitous it was in the cultural part of the paper, and all the rest of the news was kind of depressing stuff. So I think this is your point. It's a way of generating news as well as a way of spreading news. And I'm sorry, is that what you were saying? So it's become a sort of a virtuous cycle, if you will, of spreading news as well as generating news. And I have to admit, I did not know about the song they were talking about. That's how lame I am. I don't know if you all probably knew about this song. And apparently President Obama is like me. He also didn't know about the song until they showed him a montage of people that was made about people doing this. What is it? It's Call Me Maybe. Yeah, that's right. So anyway, but the point is that it's still generating New York Times worthy, front page worthy articles about the fact that Twitter is being used to spread information around the world internationally, that it's that influential. So, I mean, I think that says something, that, this is a very timely topic for us to be studying this phenomenon. And, it's not just Twitter. Other social media as well is having this really big impact, but we have our great friends at Twitter, and so we're studying Twitter in this class, and they're just in San Francisco, very convenient as well. And there's certainly a lot at Twitter to keep us occupied. Let's do really quickly some statistics. These are from the Pew Center for the Study of Internet and American Life, so these are just American statistics, and I know Gilad has some international statistics. And this is just some very recent usage. They look in terms of percent of internet users, which is a percent of Americans, which is not all Americans who use the internet, but it's a large proportion, and I haven't checked the most recent numbers. And this is showing very recent numbers. This just came out for 2012. We're now getting 15% of internet users are using Twitter. 8% are claiming they use it daily. And this is self-report data for the Pew Center's numbers. And it's been somewhat steadily increasing. That's a large proportion. And these numbers might be a little hard to read, but this is a further breakdown. It's pretty even gender-wise, men and women. Very recently, there's been an increase of young people using it, so 18 to 29. Before that, actually, it was a slightly older crowd that was doing it, a more professional use. And a very interesting gender breakdown compared to other internet usage. Actually, they show here, I'm not getting my mouse cursor, but you see white non-Hispanic is 12% of internet users, and black non-Hispanic 28%, with 2 stars showing a significant difference, and Hispanic 14%. And that's a very unusual number to see a non-white group being the dominant group using an internet application. I haven't seen a statistic like that before. And then pretty evenly distributed across household income, with less than 30K actually being slightly higher than the others, but not significantly different. And pretty evenly distributed across educational level, no statistically differences. And then urban and suburban more strongly than rural. And still about 20% urban internet users. Excuse me. And here again we see this suddenly increasing trend, very recent trend of young people using Twitter. It's just recently gotten popular with them this year, and I actually was unaware of that statistic, going from 18% in 2011 to 31% in 2012. So it's become cool. And then another, just one slide on Twitter history, and I know the Twitter people and others can probably do a better job, but this is just my own personal experience with Twitter history, which was I attended this conference, the International Conference on Weblogs and Social Media in 2007, which which happened about 9 months after Twitter launched, and we invited Evan Williams to be one of the keynote speakers there. And Twitter had launched at the South by Southwest conference, so he was talking about the experience of that, and at that time not everyone had even heard of Twitter. And so you can watch this video online to hear his thoughts about Twitter in the early days. And so he talks about some interesting facts and impressions. So first of all, it was a side project that was started on a whim. Jack Dorsey apparently had had this idea rattling around in his head for a while, according to Evan Williams, and then they launched it. And I always remember this talk and the fact that Evan Williams said that when my friends and colleagues sort of say, how is Twitter supposed to make money? They were saying this before Twitter was selling ads. And I always say, it was just somebody's idea of something that would be cool. Why are you so obsessed with money? You know, people are, people that don't come from a technology background, that's always what they're thinking. And I'm always it's about cool technology. It's not always about starting out about making money. Now, we're going to hear a lot about how Twitter does make money in subsequent lectures. But I think that's a difference between sometimes the technology view and the business view. And apparently what Jack Dorsey's idea was at least in 2007, as reported by Evan Williams, was to have a ubiquitous status message. So that's what you were saying. And a community of people answering the question, what are you doing? That was the first thought. That was the tagline. And then when they took it to South by Southwest, which is a conference around music and technology, they found a use that was surprising to them, but that was quite popular, which was for people to share their status at the conference. So people in a shared physical space describing what they were doing in real time and discussing it with each other and being able to share the status of what was happening. And I thought it'd be cool in this class to have a Twitter feed on the side of our lecture, but we can't have two different screens at the same time, so we're not doing that right now. He also noted at that time that it was really fun for earthquakes. So whenever there was an earthquake in the Bay Area, which happens pretty often, people would immediately be tweeting, and you could kind of share the experience, because if you're from California, earthquakes are kind of fun. If you're not, they're not. But we kind of enjoy them, and we enjoy talking about them after the fact, because we usually survive. He also talked about this notion of ambient intimacy, which wasn't his term, but what we researchers talk about, of just sort of seeing people that kind of what they're up to. So yeah, it's boring to know what they had for breakfast, but on the other hand, if it's someone you're close to, it's a way to stay close to them without having to bother them or them bothering you, and you kind of feel in touch. And that sort of thing we'd seen with other technologies. Twitter wasn't the first to support ambient intimacy, but it was a good tool for that. And he also talks about how surprised they were how the API took off the programming interface, although I think Facebook had also already been successful with that. And the other thing he was really surprised about was the use of the @ sign for replying, because there wasn't a really good reply mechanism built in. There was sort of a direct response that was hidden. And the @ sign for replying arose organically by usage, and then they had to build in tools to support that better. And so a lot of the communication and community stuff that became very popular arose more organically out of the tool. And if I said any of it wrong, Gilad, as far as you know, please correct me. But I think this is a pretty accurate summary. And there's a lot more in this talk, so feel free to go look at it online. I'm sure there are other histories of Twitter, but I like this one since I heard it many years ago. Okay, so I'm going to continue talking about Twitter as a platform for research in a moment, but before I do that, I want to have Gilad do his part. So, except I'm going to start at the top.
I'm sort of torn at what is more awkward, to put this leash around my neck or to hold it. I'll try with holding it and see how it goes. So hi everyone, I'm Gilad. I'll hold it higher. I work on Twitter search. I actually manage the team. How many of you have Twitter accounts? Holy smokes. How many of you had accounts a year ago? Holy smokes, double. Okay, so lots of what I would say might be familiar to you, and lots won't. So some stats additional to those that Marty presented. We like to think of Twitter as the fastest and simplest way to communicate, and seems like many of you agree with me. Some numbers so these numbers are true for a few months ago, June or July. We've grown since, but we had at the time 140 million active users. An active user is someone who logs regularly to the site or to the app. The majority of these users use not only our website, but also one of our mobile clients, so basically check Twitter on your phone. How many of you use Twitter on your phone? All right, that's about the majority that we see. The majority of the users, about 60%, are not in the US. There's a lot of international usage. We'll see it later. We also have lots more people that visit our site and read tweets that are not active users of the service. They don't tweet, but they read, so it's 3 times as many as active users. And there's a lot of tweets going on per day. A few months ago, it was 400 million a day. We are about 1,000 employees. We sit in San Francisco. Some of you might visit us later in the year or next year. All right, so let's talk about data at Twitter. So there's lots of types of data at Twitter. The most common type of data you think about is text. There's a lot of text at Twitter. So there's, as most of you are familiar with, there's a timeline of tweets, and they consist of these short messages. And so you're saying, 400 million or half a billion tweets, that's not that much data. It fits in my laptop, which is probably true. But the text is a small part of the tweet. So there's a timeline here, and on the lower part there's kind of the XML, or in this case JSON representation of what else is in the tweet except text. There's a green line, the fourth from the top, that's the text. The rest is all kinds of other stuff. Information about the user, information about the tweet in terms of who retweeted it or faved it or stuff like that, geolocation, entities in the tweet, and so on, that we'll talk about later. So this, and then there could be links that go to external website. 400 million tweets is a lot of data. 400 million tweets a day over a few years is a huge amount of data. There's some visualization here that I took from our blog, which is something like, this was from a year ago when we only had 200 million a day. If you would print all of them on like kind of very thin text and would bind it, and you'd get a book, and then you stack books, you'd reach higher than this building in Taipei, which is apparently the highest in the world. This is half of what we have per day. All right, so that's text, but there's other stuff that we have, other data. Most notably graphs. So one graph that we have is the social graph. And we have multiple graphs. Let's talk about the social graph first. Marty mentioned something called an @ symbol or reply, which some of you may use. You can converse with someone directly on Twitter, like Mia Farrow conversed with whoever that was, Sarah Silverman. And when you talk to someone directly, you could see it as a social relation, right? So here's a graph of, so on the left side is a graph of these relations, of people talking with each other. So, one edge of that graph is Mia Farrow talking to Sarah Silverman. And I'm kind of zooming in on the left side to one small portion, and you see what you typically see in social graphs, which are many small clicks, kind of hubs that people like to converse with, so on. So that's the social graph we have. We also have, yeah. So the question was, what are the cycles that appear in the graph? So when you, not actually sure, but I think when you reply, you can include also your sign in the reply. I think the web interface does it by default, and maybe that ended up here. Not actually sure. This graph is courtesy of Isaac Hepworth from Twitter. All right, so the other types of data that are interesting is if you just ignore the text, just think of it as a stream of stuff that's coming in. The interesting thing about that stuff is that it's timestamped. There are big differences from one point of time to the next. So here's a graph of mentions of, I believe, national teams competing in the Euro Cup this year. And they kind of evolve over time, right? You mention more and more the winning teams towards the end until the last thing is like there are two teams competing with each other and there's a huge spike of mentions about them. Other things that we see are lots of stuff around politics. This is a graph of mentions, tweets about the 4 candidates running up to Super Tuesday, the 4 Republican candidates. And you could kind of predict who is going to win from that. All right, so we talked about the social graph, which is people conversing directly with each other, but Twitter's more famous graph is the interest graph. So as you know, you can follow people on Twitter, and the fact that I follow someone doesn't mean that I have a social relation with him. I follow Obama. Unfortunately, we have no social relation, which might not be true for Marty, actually. So I follow things that I'm interested in, politicians, tech stuff from here, from the Bay Area. And that creates a graph of interests, not of social relations. This is a different graph. So you combine all these things together, the fact that you have lots of text, the fact that it's timestamped, the fact that there are relations between deep people, and you actually get what Ev predicted in 2007, early 2007, which is kind of the pulse of the world. You get to see what people are excited about, what people are interested in right now, and the long term. And these are just examples. On the top, I believe it's tracking one of the debates on Fox News, and on the lower part, it's kind of analyzing relations around the selection of Paul Ryan as VP. Okay, so we have all this data. What do we do with it? We do a bunch of stuff. One thing that's not going to repeat so much in this class is there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of work to scale up systems to handle this much data. So, you think about it as a short piece of text, but when Justin Bieber tweets this short piece of text, I have to make sure that 25 million people that follow him get that within 10 seconds. That's hard. I encourage you to try to write something like that. It's not easy. But here are the more interesting things from my perspective, at least, that we do with data, the things that require analysis and inference and understanding. So the first, because I come from that world, is search. So you have 400 million tweets a day, which, if you infer back in time, is hundreds of billions of tweets, which is, it's kind of larger, not kind of, it's larger than the index Google has today. You need to search it. And search implies relevance, and it implies doing things like determining not only what the best tweets are, but also what the best images are, and when are you interested in a person versus when you're interested in content and tweets. So that's one big and interesting things we do. The other thing is recommendations. So we recommend to you content. It could be users. There's there's an application called Who to Follow. Yes, we know there's a grammar mistake there. It's a Who to Follow recommendation. So you log into the site, and based on people that you follow, we recommend to you who else to follow. So in my case, Adam Sharp is a Twitter employee working on politics. The other guys, I don't know. They seem interesting. So we can, that may be not an awesome recommendation. So that's user recommendation, because one of the basic things is the ability to follow someone. But there's also content recommendations. I log into the site, and maybe you've been using, there's a feature called Discover. You have no mouse. All right. There's a, yeah, you have no tracker. All right, there's a feature called Discover. It's on the upper left part of the bigger slot, which kind of shows you the interesting things that happen right now, and are kind of followed or retweeted or tweeted by the people you follow. So in this case, content that's recommended to me is something about education reform from The Economist. All right, Twitter is a service by the people and for the people, but we need to sustain that service with money. So we advertise on the site. The way we advertise is we don't put annoying pieces of content from advertisers, ads, like some of the other services do. What we do is we promote organic content, tweets, users. The only thing we do with them is we put them in your timeline, even if you have not followed them. In your search timeline, in your home timeline, in your who to follow recommendations. So in these cases, the top left thing is I actually searched. I searched for Fidelity, and if you search on Google for Fidelity, it will show you ads for related services, and so do we. We have a promoted tweet. It's just a tweet. It's a tweet like any other tweet. If you follow that account, you actually got that tweet. But we promoted it to the top of the results, and we said, so this is, I guess, from some other financial services company. Similarly, we show things in your timeline, even if you haven't searched for anything, but one in 100 or a few hundred tweets will be an ad from us, a promoted tweet. So that's the center thing. And on the bottom, we also do the same for users or accounts. There are many more interesting things to do with large data. One sort of annoying thing that we have to do is fight the bad people, the spammers. So Miss Jan Jones, who is probably someone from Eastern Europe and doesn't look like that, is trying to sell me Viagra. I would like her not to do that to our users. So we need to develop some algorithms for that. I want to run very quickly over the speakers. I want to run very slowly over the speakers. No, I'll do it quickly. That you'll have in the next few weeks. But I want to do it in a way that will also show some of the features of Twitter that you might be familiar with through their tweets. So this is the next talk this next week, right? Okay, so the next talk is by Rafi, who's the director of the platform team, and Othman, who is vice president for growth at Twitter. The platform team is the team that handles the API. When you make an API request to Twitter, and you will make API requests to Twitter in this class, you go to this guy or this guy's team. So these are screen caps from our web app. Looks a bit different on the mobile apps, but they show you how many tweets these guys have, how many followers, how many people they follow. So here's a tweet from Othman. More people in the world own cell phones than toothbrushes. I think we need to rethink Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So, like first shelter and whatever, food, and then I think on the top is sexual or something. The thing I want to point out here is that you can link to stuff from tweets, and actually lots of tweets link. A large percentage, I don't remember the number, in the tens of percents. When you link to something outside, we are kind of lenient about this 140 character limitation that I said before. You can tweet a very long link, we'll compress it automatically, but we'll show it as a longer link. So that's from Othman. From Rafi, I was told to go on vacation, pretty stressed out by this. And he actually did something else in that tweet. He checked in on Foursquare. And the thing I want to point out here is what we call expanded tweets. So tweets, remember the thing from before, this JSON big struct with lots of goodies? One of the goodies was external references to elements that are contained in the tweet. In this case, you checked in on Foursquare. So we partner with Foursquare and a bunch of others, and we tell you what that check-in means. So we identify that that's a check-in to some airport, and we show a little map and so on. And there's a link back to Foursquare so they can get some traffic too. All right, I think the week after that, or maybe in the same week even. All right, so maybe in the same week, you're going to start learning about the tools that we use for crunching through this big data. And one of the main tools is Pig, which is a layer over Hadoop, which some of you may have learned. And the guys who are going to talk to you about that are Bill and John. Both of them work on Pig and on Hadoop on setting up large clusters of machines that can crank to this amount of tweets. So you can imagine if I want to do say a user recommendation, I need to go through the entire follow graph or the entire interest graph. That's a lot of edges. If you think about 140 million active users, and edges exist between active and non-active users. By the way, John does not look like this. He does have a face. You will discover it. So let's say they're order of 200 million users. Let's say that everyone follows a few tens. Those are graphs with billions of edges. All right, so this was something that was mentioned before. You can converse on Twitter. It's a public conversation, but it's still a conversation between two people. Bill tweeted, next Hadoop Summit should have power strips beneath the seats. And John says, dear God, yes. Says it from his iPhone, by the way. It says where you say it from, because there were no power strips. So you can talk between people. We saw an example in the beginning. And you can have a longer conversation. It can be threaded like you've seen on forums, so it can branch out. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about relates to the time series, right? So we talked about how tweets are timestamped and they come and the volume changes over time and so on. So there are two interesting things to do there. One is how do we handle streams of data, and specifically how do we handle streams of Twitter data, and the other thing is what is interesting with streams of data, identifying irregularities. So the people that we'll talk about that both come from a trends team. Ryan actually manages the trends team. Kostas is a member of it. So one feature I want to point out with these two guys is that we have protected accounts. Not all accounts are public. Ryan's account is not public. You cannot just follow him. You have to, so Facebook style, right? You kind of send a request. And I cannot see his tweets unless I'm in the exclusive club. Yeah, the other thing I want to point with a tweet from Kostas. How many people read Greek? Nobody? All right. This is about. I don't read Greek either. This is about some weird plan that the opposition party in Greece had to increase the growth of the country through confiscating bank accounts. But the point is Twitter supports languages other than English, including CJK, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, and all sorts of European languages. And like I said in the beginning, most of the content is actually, or most of the users at least, are not from the US. Then we're going to talk about search, my favorite subject. The person who will talk about is Brian, who leads the Search and Relevance organization. He's a tech lead. So here's a tweet from him. Accidentally created an unwanted subtier named Tilda. See if you can guess where this is going next. How many people are avid Unix users? All right, so you can guess what's going on. So he did something terrible, basically. The thing I want to point out is retweets and favorites. You can retweet something, and what it does is the equivalent of email forward, but automatically forward it to everybody that follows you. So I think it was very funny. I want my followers to share that fun, so I'll retweet it. The other thing you can do is you can favorite a tweet. That doesn't actually do anything except two things. First is kind of send a signal that you like this, and the second thing is it makes it easier for you to find it later because we actually organize and show you all your favorites, your favorite tweets. All right. After that, we're going to have a bunch of talks about recommendations, about graphs, about recommender systems. So the three people who are going to talk about that are Anish, who works on the personalization team, the team that does that who to follow. Alpa, who works on the revenue team, on ad targeting, and Stan, who works on the trends team. So we saw before how it looks when something you tweeted was retweeted, right? Or faved. You get a little counter there on the bottom that says retweeted 100 times or 2 times, and the people, or at least the most recent people that retweeted it. Here's how it looks to me. I don't follow Anish. I follow Alpa. So in my timeline, what I see is suddenly a tweet from Anish, who I don't know, and it says retweeted by Alpa on the bottom there. Well, he says, oh, it's kind of a sad tweet. Right. Almost the last thing, I think, or maybe the last thing, is this annoying thing that we talked about, the Viagra dudes from Eastern Europe. We have teams to fight that. Kurt is on that team. Kurt is actually from a security lab at Berkeley. He's working with us now. Delip used to be on the trends team. Now he's fighting spam. I said that you have links in Twitter. One special kind of link you can have in tweets is images. So you can tweet directly a photo from your mobile phone. Basically, whenever there's a photo in a tweet, it's expanded automatically, and you can kind of see it in place. In this case, about Starbucks, about how they call their okay, this is that one, how they call their coffee sizes. Okay, so the last topic is kind of an advanced topic. I mentioned in the beginning Pig, which is the most common tool we use for crunching big data. There's one other tool we use a lot, which is called scalding. So Pig is sort of built over Java and has a SQL SQL-like semantics. Scalding is a more modern system that's built over Scala and has a more idiomatic programming language semantics. It allows you more flexibility, and it's actually developed at Twitter. It's open source, and the two of the main developers are Oscar and Argyris. Both of them develop Scalding, but they are on the revenue team. They make money for us. So here's a tweet from Oscar. InfoWord article on Hadoop mentions Scalding. Two things I want to mention about this tweet are hashtags, which I think we saw before in other tweets, and geotags. So hashtags are sort of a way to attach either a topic or kind of a keyword to your tweet that makes it easily searchable. That hashtag is clickable, and you can see all the other tweets containing that hashtag, and it also kind of is used in many cases to specify emotion and not really topic, so you can say hashtag frustrated or hashtag happy. The other thing is that tweets can come with a location, especially if you're using a mobile phone, but also if you're using a web app, you can specify a location. And in this case, it's tweeted from our old office in Soma. We moved to the Tenderloin. All right, so here are my goals for the class. I want you to work with real stuff. I want you to work with the real APIs that Twitter offers. I want you to work with the data that we have. And I also want you to learn how it is to work in a place like Twitter. So each one of these sample applications I talked about, user recommendation, search, spam fighting, involves multiple steps. You have data, you need to analyze it, you need to get it, crunch it. Then you need to develop an algorithm about it. Then you need to test that, then you need to deploy that, and so on. And I would really like as many as you as possible to go through these steps. And I also want you to build something useful. So Marty will talk about that, but part of this class will be to build stuff that runs over Twitter. And I also just want this to be fun. So I hope we have a good time doing this.
Before I take over, are there any questions for what Gilad has covered so far on what he just covered? We'll have questions about the class at the end of the class.
By the way, this is my Twitter handle. I'm about to gain 50 free followers, I feel. Please follow me.
Any questions about what you covered so far?
Yeah. We'll work on external APIs. If there are projects that need access to internal data, we'll do our best to make that happen. I can't promise anything. Other questions? All right. Okay, so the question was about working on sentiment or moods or emotions. It's up to you. If that's what you find interesting, by all means, yes. It's some of the most interesting applications that I've seen with Twitter data involve emotions and moods and tracking them.
Okay, well, we'll have time for questions at the end as well. So
All right, thanks.
We'll both be answering them. So let me resume my talk. I'm going to wear the embarrassing thing. My audio will be better. Okay, so now I want to talk a bit about Twitter relating to research. And I will start this with, I think, a pretty stunning number. So I was going to actually suggest that we make an annotated bibliography of Twitter research, and I was going to start out with some of them and maybe have the class make a comprehensive annotated bibliography of Twitter research. So I searched for Twitter in Google Scholar, and I got this rather frightening number. I don't know if you can see it, but Scholar claims 369,000 matches since 2008. Now, I don't really believe that number, and their database has gotten really big. They include news articles and stuff, but I don't think there's a lot of articles about birds tweeting. I don't really know what their numbers mean these days, but it does suggest that there are quite a lot of academic articles, nonetheless, about Twitter. So given that that number was sort of bizarre, I went over to Microsoft now has an academic search tool that doesn't have nearly as big a collection. But even this search tool had 1,200 publications with the word Twitter in it. And again, I guess there's actually one researcher named Bespy Twitter, so he or she might be getting a lot of hits these days. But that's still a lot, and you can see, yeah, I don't have a mouse right now, I don't know why. Most of them are in computer science, but there's some labeled, at least by their algorithms, as social science, engineering, medicine, and so on. Maybe the medical ones are not relevant, but they probably are actually. Healthcare and Twitter is getting a lot of work. So this suggests that a lot of people are doing research using Twitter data, and I know it's true for a fact as well. So what's going on with research in Twitter? I decided just to pull out a few of these topics to discuss, but obviously there's a lot, and that's what this class is about to some degree. So I looked at some of the papers that have a lot of citations. So they are about things like, what is Twitter? So Kwan et al.'s paper, what is Twitter, a social network or a news media, kind of relating to your remark. It's both, I think, is probably the answer. Who uses Twitter? So what are the demographics of Twitter users? Studying it maybe more empirically based on the data as opposed to what the Pew Center does, which is based on surveys. What do they tweet about? So I'll talk a little bit in detail about the Java et al. Paper I have listed here in a moment, but Ramage et al.'s paper is on using topic modeling to analyze the contents of Twitter tweets. There's endless work you can do on trying to automatically analyze, taxonomize the content of the tweets, or analyze the network structure and the users. Who is influential? What is Twitter network? What do Twitter networks mean? That's another line of research. The Wang et al. Paper on Twitter rank is one that people cite a lot. Then there's a lot of applications. So Twitter in large-scale emergencies. There's a lot of interest in not just Twitter, but other social media as well for that application area. What does Twitter mean about your social status or how people relate to each other? So Twitter in interpersonal relationships, and Huberman et al. Paper is well known there. Bernardo tends to always get the first big paper in a new area, and he did it here too. Microblogging at work, so kind of more qualitative social science papers come out, although that doesn't necessarily fit into our big data theme. The use of the @ sign, so Honey and Herrig have a well-known paper, Beyond Microblogging, Conversation and Collaboration via Twitter. And then there's interest in topics like epidemiology, so monitoring disease outbreaks using social media, so pandemics in the age of Twitter, that sort of thing. Or our colleague Hal Varian has looked at he's more looked at search logs, but trying to do economic forecasting, or what he calls nowcasting, to get data, say, on economic indicators that's more rapid than what the standard government agency tools can do, which come out on a monthly or yearly basis, when you can get economic indicators on a very much a real-time basis. And you can look at, can you do that with Twitter data? People have done this, of course, with political information, trying to predict elections. The jury's sort of out on that. Some people have claimed that they were predicting elections better than other methods, and then other papers have come back and said those other papers were wrong, they were not doing a good job. So I think that's very much an area of controversy right now. How good is social media at predicting elections? So I want to go into two papers in a little more detail that combine big data and Twitter data. So one that made kind of a splash, at least in my world recently, was this article that came out in Science magazine recently. It was called "Diurnal and Seasonal Mood Vary with Work, Sleep, and Day Length Across Diverse Cultures," and it was published last September. So this is my summarizing this paper. The goal of this paper was to obtain data about people's moods throughout the day and across the globe to see if and how they correspond to time of day. So apparently, and again, I'm paraphrasing a field that I'm not very expert in, so I may not be capturing it absolutely accurately. But apparently, when researchers study how people's moods change, there are this is opposed to how it's typically done, where people are interviewed, they're asked by an experimenter, "How are you feeling right now?" It's in a lab setting, or reported after the fact, or by a diary study that's not necessarily done over a long term, or done by only a few people. And so some of the background is that individual mood is an affective state, so it's a way people feel, and it can be influenced both by neurochemicals and hormones and by social activity, things that happen to someone, including and their daily routines, when they sleep, when they're awake. And then there's this notion of both positive and negative affect. And the current research suggests that these are independent dimensions. And so positive affect, things like enthusiasm, delight, and alertness, that's positive affect. Negative affect being defined as emotions like distress, fear, anger, and guilt. And the research suggests that low positive affect indicates the absence of positive feelings, not the presence of negative ones. So that's what they mean by there being independent dimensions. So just because you don't feel enthusiastic, delight, alertness doesn't mean you do feel distress, fear, anger, and guilt. So not having positive affect does not mean you do have negative affect. That's what the research is suggesting. But because most of the data is sparse and is done in laboratory settings or other ways, it's not necessarily as strong as they might think. And there has been evidence that it's tied to sleep patterns, but the evidence was sparse. So what they wanted to do was use Twitter data to get a lot of evidence to see what the patterns are. So they got a really big collection of Twitter data, 509 million posts, 2.4 million different users' posts. That's a lot of people. They had at least between, I'm saying posts because I'm not sure if it was original tweets or if it included retweets or not. That wasn't clear in the part of the paper I read. And there were a lot of auxiliary appendices, and I didn't read all of them, that might have cleared it up. Between 25 and 400 posts per user. And the data was between February 2008 and January 2010. So about 2 years. And it was international, around the globe, but only English posts, only English speakers. Okay. And then they analyzed the text of tweets using this pretty standard content analysis tool called LIWC, which is pretty straightforward tool, which is basically looking at which words occur, comparing them against a dictionary of terms that have been pre-classified using psychological normative studies to be positive or negative. So pretty kind of crude tool, but it's been used by many, many psychological studies and kind of validated. So here are some graphs that they ended up with, and the top part is, the mouse doesn't work, but the top part is our lines for positive affect, and the bottom part are lines for negative affect, and the colors are for different days of the week: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and the colors are confidence intervals around the black line, which is the value, I guess the average value for the confidence interval. And the main point to see is, and then on the x-axis we see the hour. So in the middle is noon, and then we have midnight on the far right. So the main thing to see is that it's kind of the same shape. First of all, it's pretty tight, and that it's kind of the same shape independent of the day of the week, and that people do have higher positive affect on the weekend, on Sunday and Saturday. But the shape is pretty much the same, and that there's sort of a higher affect, positive affect in the morning, and then higher around midnight and lower in the middle of the day. And let's see, the low point in the middle of the day, and then going higher around midnight. And then the negative affect, also seeing that it also kind of peaks around midnight, interestingly, and that it's lowest in the morning. So people kind of start out in a good mood in the morning, and then it kind of gets progressively worse as the day goes on. But most importantly, that it's not all over the map, that they actually saw these patterns. They also saw these patterns were for different blocks across the world. They broke it into India, Africa, Australia, and the UK, and US and Canada. There's higher variance in Africa and India. That was less variance in the other groupings. And I don't know if, go ahead. Yeah. So it's taking the time that they tweet, and then they're doing content analysis on the tweets. So there may well be fewer tweets at that time of day. So I assume they normalize for that factor. Yeah, but that's right. These are the times of day. That's thank you for pointing that out. This time of day that they tweet, and they're taking the contents of the tweets. So yeah, are they awake and tweeting? Yeah. And they go into some detail about various, differences for which countries are on work weeks where and work schedules and what variations might go into that. But the point is just having this massive amount of data, millions of people, and when are they tweeting and how many tweets are they doing, hasn't been possible before. And seeing very consistent patterns is really quite interesting. Now, we'll get into what are the possible issues in a slide. Oh, is there a question? The one thing that I found really interesting that wasn't in the main paper, but it was in the appendices, but they mentioned it in the main paper, is this existence of the night owls. And my grandmother always claimed she was a night owl, so I found this really interesting. So you see there is this outlier set of people, which is the gray bar here, for both positive affect and negative affect. And how they broke people up was if they did a especially large number of tweets at different times of the day. So the night owls did more tweets later at night, so kind of getting to your point. And they also, these people, and there was no difference between the people who did more tweets in the morning, afternoon, or evening. They pretty much had the same pattern. But the people who did a lot of tweets late at night also had different patterns of affect at late at positive and negative affect, suggesting that there might actually be people with a different rhythm at that time. So I thought that was really interesting. So let's discuss these results a little bit. First of all, what are some of the assumptions